about choices. And I'm going to use a passage which has a great importance to me as a person. 41 years ago, I made a choice. And it was a choice to follow God. It's a choice to become a believer in Christ. I was only 6 years old at the time. And although I didn't get baptized in water, because at the time I felt that we belonged to a church that believed that you had to be much older to be baptized in water, I'd given my life to the Lord Jesus at the age of 6. And as a good son does, he asks his father, what should he do? And my dad gave me 2 specific passages to read in the Bible. He doesn't remember this. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 6. And the 2 passages he told me to look up as a young believer coming to know Jesus, well, the first one was about Samuel, and Eli. And everybody talks about that passage for childhood faith. But the second passage, and to me the most important passage, and it's a passage we're going to be looking at today, when it comes concerning choices, was Solomon asking for wisdom. And as a 6-year-old child, I remember praying, Lord, would you make me wise like Solomon, so that I can make the right choices in life. Now, all my life I haven't been wise, but neither was Solomon. There are times when we make foolish choices, but the key that we have to come back to is, how do we make wise choices? And this is the passage that we're going to be looking at in 1 Kings chapter 3. But before we start, I've got a short clip that I would like us to watch, and then we'll read the passage.
Solomon, the son of King David, ascended to the throne and embarked on a profound journey to the high place at Gibeon, where he sought to make offerings to God. At Gibeon, we witness Solomon's extraordinary humility. God appeared to Solomon in a dream, allowing him to ask for anything he desired. Rather than requesting riches, power, or long life, Solomon made a remarkable choice. He asked for wisdom, stating, "Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil." God was pleased with Solomon's request and not only granted him wisdom, but also promised him wealth and honor, such that no king would ever surpass him. This divine wisdom enabled Solomon to become a renowned judge, an author of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and a builder of the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. His reputation for unparalleled wisdom attracted the famous visit of the Queen of Sheba. Solomon's request for wisdom serves as a timeless lesson in prioritizing discernment over worldly treasures, showcasing the impact of seeking divine wisdom on a person's life and its benefit to the broader community.
It's not a long clip, but it highlights several different points. And these points are: choices matter. We make choices every single day. And the question we have to ask ourselves, are we making wise choices? In Solomon's case, he asked for wisdom. But he'd already made choices before he'd asked for wisdom. He didn't seek God in asking for wisdom. God sought Solomon, because Solomon was not in the right place. He wasn't ready to receive the wisdom that God had, because he was blinded by his own so-called desires, wants. And sometimes in life we have to step back and say, are we listening to the wisdom of God, or are we listening to the desires of our hearts? There are 4 points that I want to bring to you today. If you could have the slide up on the board. When it comes to making choices for our life, we have to ask ourselves these 4 questions, which we will find in the passage that we're about to read in 1 Kings chapter 3. The first point is this: are we consistent in our alliance with God as being the highest priority in our lives? Or are we too busy making alliances with other things? The second point is, are we conscious of the spirits that are behind the choices we make, whether it be good or whether it be bad? Do we realize that every choice we make has the ability to either bound us up in sin or to release us into the freedom that God has for us? The third thing is, are we living in the right tension between childlikeness and maturity? Are we ready to follow after what God as our Father tells us to do? And equally, are we ready to mature enough to father others in the faith as well through the choices we make? The final and most important point that we see in this passage is the cost of caring. Solomon does not ask for his own self-benefit. His priority, central to this whole passage, is he asks for wisdom to rule others rightly. He is more focused on other people than he is on himself. And this is the cost of caring. This chapter that we're about to read is split into different parallelisms. And you have to understand that the structure of certain things in Hebrew writing often is structured in a parallel way, communicating the most important point in the middle. Each point reflects the beginning and the end. So at the beginning, we find here is Solomon, and he's so busy walking about. He's moving. He's going from one area to the other area, to this area, to that area, to this area. And this is found in the beginning of the chapter. But the change that happens at the end is he stood. And he stood still, and is before the presence of God, and he's not moving. He's returned to the right place that he needs to be. Can I have the slide back up again, please, on the different choices there? The second point, consciousness, is reflected as well. At the first part of the building, he's unaware of the consequences of the choices that he's made. He's in a dream. He's asleep to the realities of what's going on in his life. But we find at the end of this chapter, or this point of this story, he's awakened. He sees the presence of God. He sees the importance of his choices. Then we go on and we find that he talks about being a child. I can't understand this. I'm not good. I'm not adapted away. I don't know how to rule your people. Lord, help me. I can't make this decision. I'm not wise enough. And then we see that God turns him into a father of wisdom. He becomes the protocol that others are to follow. But right sandwiched in the middle of this text, verses 10 to 11, and we're going to read it shortly, we find that God is pleased because Solomon asked for wisdom for the benefit of other people rather than for riches, wealth, or fame. This is the most important thing in the entire point. The choices that we make, are they about us or are they about God and what God wants to do in our lives? Because at the end of the day, the accountability that we have before God is when we made our choices, did we make it with wisdom Or did we make it for selfish gain? Because if we made it for selfish gain, then the fear of God needs to come on us while we have the opportunity to change at this moment in time. Because I don't want to stand in front of God and find out that I've blown it. Because I wanted to be wealthy, because I wanted to be famous, because I wanted what I wanted. There's a book that's recently come out which is really clear. I've never had the chance to read it, but I like the title of the book, and it's a brilliant title. It's Don't Follow Your Heart. There's so many things out there saying, just follow your heart. And the subtitle of this book is Breaking the 10 Commandments of Selfishness. This is nothing new. If society teaches you that following your heart is a new thing, do whatever makes you feel happy is a new thing, we've been doing it since the beginning of the world. What did Eve do? She saw the fruit and she perceived or desired it as good. And she disobeyed the words of God so that she could have the desires of her heart. But not just content with the desires of her heart, she brought her husband along for the journey. And we've been living in the consequences of that following your heart's desire since the beginning of the world. Let's read the passage in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking accordingly to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, "Ask whatever you want me to give you." Solomon answered, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a child, a little child, and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administrating justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life." Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court. Consistency. Highly important. When I was a young man, one of the things that I wanted to do when I had gone through a prodigal son experience coming back into the church was I wanted to listen to my father's teaching. I loved my father's preaching. He was my favorite preacher. He still is my favorite preacher. And I remember listening to one particular message, and it transformed my life. I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes there is one message that God speaks through a minister, and it changes your whole perception. All of a sudden, you saw things in one way, you see things completely different in another way. And the message he preached on was the lesser loyalty. Loyalty is the number one factor that we see in Christ, that we don't see in every other human being that has walked this earth. Above all things, he was loyal to the Father. Whatever the Father did or said, the Son did or said. He never sang from a different song sheet. He was constantly united to what the Father was doing. The problem when we come to the beginning of this text is Solomon is already doing things before he's asked for wisdom, which his father never did. He's starting to marry outside of God's household. Not only those who are outside of God's household, but the very nation, the very people that subjected God's people to slavery. He had made an alliance with Pharaoh, the one who saw himself as God on earth. He had made an alliance with the one who lived in the land of the dead. Egypt is the place of the dead. There are tombs everywhere, and those tombs are celebrated as the means by which you can achieve the afterlife. This is the one who took slaves and people to build expensive projects on this earth. And Solomon, as we find in the text, is doing the very same thing. He starts to subjugate those to build the building projects of Israel, whether it be his palace, whether it be the fortress at Megiddo, or whether it also be the very temple of God. He starts to submit people into slavery to build these projects for his own ambition. And for Pharaoh's daughter, he builds a luxury palace for her as well. His choices are all over the place. They have the altar of worship where everything's being sacrificed at Gibeon. Why? Well, because what had happened was that they moved the Ark of the Covenant away from the tabernacle, and they placed the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem, but they had left the tabernacle in Gibeon. And this is important because Gibeon is an alliance. Gibeon are the people who were the Canaanites that deceived Israel when it came into the promised land. And they pretended that they had come into the promised land as well. And they made a covenant with Gibeon that they wouldn't attack them or destroy them. And as a result of making that covenant, there's a high place that has been put right in the middle of the promised land. And this high place is the place where God's people have wandered off the path with their alliance with God. They started to worship in the flesh and not in the presence of God before the Ark of the Covenant. Sometimes there's a separation in our minds because we come to church to do the ritual, to worship God with God's people here on a Sunday, but we are called to be worshipers 24/7. And that the presence of God isn't in this building, it's in us. And when we come together as a people, it's the presence in us that comes to the fore. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I also. Or is it a building? Even God talking to Solomon and David, what building are you going to build me? Because the earth is my footstool. The heavens is my realm of living. There's nothing that can contain our God. Even when we say we will make a space or room for God in our lives, He's bigger than us. Revelation talks about us living in Him and not Him living in us. A transition mode that actually we don't walk around doing whatever we want and God follows us. No, what does Jesus say? He says, come. Follow me. Consistency. There has to be a consistency in prioritizing. God is the highest loyalty. All other things are a lesser loyalty. So there's a contrast at the beginning where he's walking, he's moving, he's going to Gibeon, he's building things, he's too busy doing things. Verse 15, it says that he returned to Jerusalem. He changed. He did a full 360. Rather than being busy doing things, he came back to the presence of God. And he stood. And instead of doing the sacrifices in Gibeon, he brought the sacrifices right into the presence of God, even before the temple was built. Transition takes place. And this transition takes place because he has a revelation. Our choices matter. We can prioritize the things and the alliances with this world, or we can prioritize our alliance with God. What is funny is that he befriends Egypt. Yet we find out it later on in Solomon's story that all the enemies that come against him, they flee to Egypt. Egypt isn't your friend. The world isn't your friend. It may celebrate you in the moment and turn its back on you in your moment in need and embrace your enemies. At one moment you may have a victor in Palestine or the Palestinian. The next moment you may have a victor in the Israelites. The world changes its mind. It fluctuates all the time. God alone is faithful. God alone is loyal. Prioritize your alliance with God. Be consistent. The second thing is consciousness. So many of us are wandering around all over the place that God has to speak to us in our dreams when we're still. Because we don't prioritize coming into His presence awake. We're too busy sleepwalking in our lives that we just go through the motions. And then all of a sudden, if we're lucky, we might hear the voice of God. Rather than being awake and seeking Him out and saying, Lord, what is it that you want me to do at this moment in time? God, shall I be doing this? Shall I be doing that? Or I haven't really heard from God. I just carry on doing what I'm doing. I just do this because he's not said anything to me. It's a beautiful thing to be aware or be conscious that there is a spiritual reality beyond the material. And when you become awakened to the spiritual things, you all of a sudden realize that the physical is just the tip of the iceberg. It's only a third of what the iceberg is. There's 2/3 that are hidden under the water. And God's people need to be discerning. They need to see that there is a depth that goes beyond what people are just saying that seems nice, that seems polite. I remember once as a young man, I came into the pastorhood and I was pastoring and counseling another young man. And he came into my office, and he'd come into my office because he said to me very clearly, he said, I want to be a church leader just like you. And as he was speaking to me, the Lord said, that's not the reason he's come into your office. Said there's something else going on in this young man's life that he's not owning up to. And what was a 45-minute meeting turned into a 3-hour meeting as we were dealing with what was going on in the man's life. Because he was projecting this element of being a godly person, wanting to achieve all these things for God, but the truth be known, he was committing sin behind closed doors. And unbeknown to him, God had told me what it was. And when I was speaking to him, it wasn't wanting to point or highlight the thing for him. It was trying to open up the conversation through questions to define the choices that he had been making in life. And that the choices were unconscious to the evil nature of the things that he was dealing with. He was in a secret relationship with a young girl who was underage. And he didn't want to admit that that was the situation in his life. It was hidden. But it was a trap. It was ready to spring open and swallow him up. If he was ready to admit where he was in his life, he would have put things right and been out in the open and put the safeguardings in place that he needed to do. But he wasn't ready to deal with it because what he wanted to be was on the stage, on the platform, preaching and teaching and getting people to listen to what he had to say because he had a gift. I have a gift and it's not used properly. And I need to be uplifted, and I need to be shown, and I need to be seen, and I need to speak. But I have to deal with the choices that I make on the inside. I need to be conscious of the spiritual forces at work that can bind me up and stop me from achieving what God wants me to achieve. The third thing is a childlike maturity. In this passage, when it comes to making choices, we need to be childlike, and we also need to be mature, as opposed to childish and independent. See, often in our society, we confuse maturity as independence. The ability to do our own thing without having to be dependent on anyone else. Well, the truth be known, God created man. God created woman. Why did he create two? He created it because they wanted them to be dependent on each other and dependent on him. God never created humanity to be independent or individual. That is the lie of the West. It has been a lie that has infiltrated his church, so that his church does not seek community unity. It seeks to be spiritual individuals who go on retreats and isolate themselves with them and God, but don't want to relate with their fellow brother and sister. God has called us to relate to one another, to be independent on one another. Our individual situations affect the wider corporate. If the least among you is in problems, it's going to have problems on everybody else. You know, if you're at a watering hole and you're drinking water, you don't want people urinating in your water. If it's the only source of water, you don't want people bathing in it either, because it contaminates the whole pot. And God wants his people to be holy and set apart for him, and to have unity and to be dependent. So the first thing to understand is, here is Solomon, he's saying, I am a child, but I see my Father. I've had an example set before me that I am not able in my own state at this moment in time to keep up with. It says he was a child. I mean, even David acknowledges it. I have to get all the places in point for the building of the temple because my son Solomon, he's just a child. He's not mature enough. He's not experienced enough. But I need to help him as much as I can so that he can get to that place where he can start to father faith in others. So he acknowledges his situation, his humility, that he is weak and he needs strength, and he asks the Lord that he will make him wise. Not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of the wider community. Childlike and maturity. James 1:5-8 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. So everybody, every time we pray, the number one thing we pray for is what? Wisdom. Lord, bless my children. Lord, bless my health. Lord, bless my wealth. Lord, make everything happen for me. Make me famous. Give me the Mercedes I've always wanted. Give me the wealth I've always needed. James goes on. Who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Hebrews 5:13-14. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. And then we go on into 1 Kings 4:29-31. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. It's an allusion to what it talks about with Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the seashore. We find that also in Revelation, that the dragon is standing on the sand, which is numerous as the seashore. Having that discernment to see and know that the enemy doesn't want you to have discernment. The enemy doesn't want you to have wisdom. The enemy wants you to desire the things of this world, because once you desire the things of this world more than wisdom and discernment, you become ineffective. You become childish. You become immature. You start to become like the little baby sucking the thumb. Paul talked about it, didn't he? He wanted to give them solid food, but they still wanted their milk. Nice to suck your thumb every now and then, isn't it? To have your creature comforts. But when you ask for wisdom, God starts to shake things up. The most important part of the text is 1 Kings 3:10 to 11. And you know it's the most important thing in the text because it starts off with these 4 words. Whenever you hear these 4 words, you know the author of the Bible, whatever scripture you're reading, is trying to tell you something that you should be doing in your life. You should be prioritizing in your life. The Lord was pleased. You see these words with Noah when he puts the sacrifice at the end of the thing. The Lord was pleased. At the beginning of the story of Noah, he's not pleased at all. Even at the beginning of this story with Solomon, God is not pleased. It makes it sound like God comes to Solomon in a dream and it's all nice and fairy, but he's actually challenging Solomon. He's actually coming to decree what is in Solomon's heart, because the actions I see that Solomon is committing are not godly actions. You know, the fact is this: Solomon is the only king in the Old Testament that doesn't have a prophet. Wisdom, and if you operate in wisdom, makes prophecy take a back seat. If you are walking in a wise place and you know God's heart and God's will, then there doesn't need to come the correction through the prophet that you're walking on the wrong path, or that things are going to go wrong, or this is what's going to happen in the future because you've been doing that. No, Solomon knew what was right and what was wrong. And Solomon's actions made him more accountable to God. But the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. This is the cost of caring. It's reflective of Jesus Christ. Not my will be done, but your will be done. Seen in Solomon. It's powerful. When we become selfless, we start to reflect the God's heart. If people talk to you about God being a selfish God, they are very much deceived. No, what the biggest deception that you can find in life is the belief that the enemy doesn't exist. Because if the enemy doesn't exist, then all the problems are God's. God becomes evil. But there is an enemy, and he does exist. And we need to understand that he wants us to be selfish. He desires for us to be his children, because he doesn't want us to be God's children. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, he will give them the things that he didn't ask for." Isn't that beautiful? Could you imagine this? If our prayer lives started to become less selfish, then we find that the very thing that we're selfish about, we might actually even have. Because God has chosen to give us these things as well, because of our selflessness. James 4, 1-4. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. And then Proverbs 2, 3-10. Indeed, if you call out for wisdom and insight, and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as if for silver, and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path, for wisdom will enter your heart and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. I love that one line, wisdom will enter your heart. He's talking about the Holy Spirit. He's talking about God in us, the hope of glory. The one who breathed into mankind himself, and he became a living spirit. The spirit of life is where wisdom is. The spirit of death is where foolishness is. Solomon is a good example. We find in 1 Kings chapter 1-11 the story of Solomon. It starts off with his call, his rise. Then the next thing we find is he builds the temple. He restores everything that's going into God and brings a central place of worship. And then it goes into his fall. Pride comes before a fall. Foolishness leads to falls. Solomon's foolishness we already see in the passage, that he made an alliance with Pharaoh, the king, and married his daughter. 1 Kings 11, 1-4. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. You can have all the wisdom in the world, but if you don't put it into practice, it means nothing. There's a beautiful passage that Jesus talks about, and he talks about the lilies of the field. He talks about the birds in the field, and he says, do not worry about what you need in life, the material things. Even Solomon, in all his splendor, does not compare to these things. And then he goes on to say, you are worth more than many sparrows. If God can look after the birds of the field, the grasses and the life that's sustained year in, year out. I mean, I don't know about you, I've been doing some work on my trees, pruning them and cutting them back, and they look really stark, and it looks like there's no life there. But you can be guaranteed I will be doing it the next year, because there will be so much life there that it's regrown again. Prioritize the kingdom of God in your life, the wisdom of God in your life. He needs to be able to speak into your heart, and you need to do his will. Train yourself. Discipline yourself. Don't be like Solomon, distracted with those that your heart desires after. I want the new iPhone. I want a new car. I want a bigger house. I want my children to talk to me respectfully. I want my wife to treat me like I'm a god. I want to do all these different things. I want, I need, I must, I have, I. iPhone, iPad, all these different things. It's not about me. I must decrease so that he must increase. John the Baptist was a wise man. He understood it was not about him. Yet it says of John the Baptist, even he is smaller than the least in the kingdom. Those who are in the kingdom of God are greater than John the Baptist. Be obedient to his words. I must decrease so that he must increase. Shall we stand?